Okay, welcome everyone. This is a 90-minute webinar on the topic of shifting the power with your partner organisation. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get going. So I am working with the FSI on this small international development charities programme that is funded by UK Aid through the FCDO, through the unfortunately now defunct Small Charities Challenge Fund. The FSI exists to create a world filled with independent, effective and accountable charities with the belief, passion and capacity to achieve their vision, working to build and share knowledge, elevate the voice of small charities with policymakers and the public, and to build leadership in small charities, to support them to raise the vital funds needed to meet the needs of the people that they work with. So this programme in particular is for small UK charities working internationally. We've got funding until the end of this year for this programme, but hopefully you'll be pleased to hear that we are working together with the FSI to make sure that all of their ongoing training in their core programme is suitable and appropriate for international development charities. So I'm actually working on going through every single piece of their core programme to make sure that there's an international lens that makes it relevant and appropriate to organisations working in an international context as well. So there'll be a legacy from this programme at the end of the funding. We've got some up and coming training and webinars. We've got a peer showcase and networking session for organisations that are working with women and girls. That's on the 19th of April, and we're going to be hearing from a couple of small charities who are sharing their work with women and girls, sharing some of the learning that they have taken from that work. I'm going to be delivering a Web 90, so 90-minute webinar on the topic of moving on from child sponsorship. So if you are running a child sponsorship scheme and you've identified some challenges, you're finding it administratively burdensome, or you're starting to question some of the ethical ramifications around a child sponsorship model, I'm going to be talking about how you can possibly move away from that model to alternatives if that's something that your organisation is thinking of. And as I mentioned, we've got on-demand recordings, we've got safeguarding, monitoring and evaluation, partnership working, fundraising, communications, and more. So there'll be an email address at the end of this presentation, and you'll be able to see that on the downloadable PDF that you should have as well. And you can find out more about those on-demand recordings on the FSI website. Through this programme, we're also offering one-to-one expert advice. So if you've got a particular query, you can send an email to the FSI and we will try to match you with an expert who will be able to advise you on your particular query. We've also got something called the peer support match. This is not quite mentoring. There's not a mentor-mentee type of dynamic. It's more just of connecting you with a peer in the sector for informal support. Finally, we've got bursaries available through this programme. So some of the FSI's core training isn't available through this funded programme, but there are bursaries available so that small international charities can access that core training through the funding from FCDO. So we are in a webinar format today. We're not going to, we will use the chat function, but we'll not use Q&A. The chat function is just a bit easier to monitor and a bit more informal. Also, feel free just to unmute yourself and ask a question as well. We'll keep this quite informal because we've got a small-ish group today. The slides will be available, so if there's information on the screen or if there's links, don't worry about frantically trying to jot down any URLs, and you'll be able to access the slides in your learner portal. The learner portal is up there on the screen, so you should be able to log in and see any of the slides and resources that are connected to this webinar on there. So you might see that there's something at the bottom that says it's live streaming. Don't worry, we are not live on the internet. That is the closed captions that you'll be able to see at the bottom of the screen. There will be some evaluation forms. You'll have paid a £10 deposit for this session, and that'll be returned to you once the pre and post surveys have been completed. We probably won't have a break in this 90-minute webinar. I would normally do a break for half a day training, but I think if you need to go and make yourself a cuppa or use the loo, feel free to do that whenever you need. We probably won't have a formal break in the 90 minutes. If you want to circulate your LinkedIn link or your email address, then please feel free to do that via the chat function. We do have the more formalized peer support matches through the FSI, but we're also very keen for people to connect and network just in a more informal way. So if you're interested in connecting with any peers on this call, feel free to do so in the chat. So getting the best from today, participate as much as you're comfortable in doing so. Keep it as a safe, confidential space to share challenges. You know, some of the stuff that we'll talk about today, it might be new to you. It might be something that you've not come across before. You might want to, you know, ask questions, which is absolutely fine. This is a safe and confidential space. If you've got questions that you would rather be answered when there's not a recording happening, you can put that in the chat and we can come back to that outside of the confines of this webinar. So stay in touch with others to build your network, be courteous to your fellow participants. So overview of what we're going to cover today then. So we're going to be looking at what the Shift the Power movement is. We're going to be looking at some practical ways that you can start to shift the power at your organization and where you can find out more information. And I'm going to be talking us through some bits at the beginning, and then my lovely colleague Mary is going to be talking us through her perspective. Just going to make sure I've got no one waiting in the waiting room. Okay. You're all starting to do that already in the chat. Okay, then let's get started. So I'm going to just move us out of the way. Shift the Power is a movement that started in around 2016, and we're going to see the timeline for where things have come since then in a second on the next slide. But it's essentially a movement that has started in response to these traditional hierarchies that we see in international aid and international development. And what we see in front of us here is typically the traditional hierarchy that we're all probably very used to seeing. Funders are at the top of the pyramid. Northern INGOs, i.e. us, UK-based charities, US organizations, any international development organization that is based in the global north or Western society is often in the middle as an intermediary between the funders with the power and the Southern NGOs, who are typically at the bottom of the pyramid there. And the Shift the Power movement is about flipping that triangle and flipping that hierarchy and putting NGOs and community-based organizations and individuals and self-help groups and movements and communities at the top of the pyramid and central to development work. So Shift the Power actually started as a hashtag movement. It was established by the Global Fund for Community Foundations in 2016, so quite recently in the grand scheme of things. And of course, these conversations will have been happening before then. But in 2016, the GFCF decided to formally start a movement to encourage players in the international development sector to start having more serious conversations about the need to move away from a top-heavy and top-down system where development is informed by organizations and individuals in the global north, in Western society. Things started to formalize more in 2019 when there was a symposium of international aid organizations in London, where they hosted a Pathways to Power symposium. They started to discuss how they could take Shift the Power to the next level and move away from, I suppose, just talking about it to actually taking some practical steps. The Shift the Power movement, it's both a call for new behaviors and mindsets and ways of working, and it's a reminder both that few interactions are ever power neutral, and that often those we seek to help in the context of international development have much more power, knowledge, skills, and networks than they're given credit for. And it's the job of those institutions that are serious about real and lasting change to know when to give up their own power and when to stand back and be able to make that happen with their partner organizations. So on the back of that symposium in 2020, the Shift the Power movement announced the official manifesto. And here are the sort of key principles that came from that Shift the Power manifesto that this group of organizations and individuals came together to agree on. It's quite an overwhelming rabbit hole of information, the Shift the Power movement. If you look at who was there at the symposium, it's some of the predictable players. So it's Bond, it's Save the Children, it's Action Aid, it's some of those kind of big players that you would expect. And some smaller organizations too, including funders, so that there's a real mix of people who've been involved in coming together to create this manifesto. And there are various different organizations and individuals who are working on the Shift the Power work. You'll see at the end of the presentation that I've put some links for further reading. And if you're like me, you'll find yourself hours into online research on this and deep down a rabbit hole, and it can be really overwhelming to begin with. And I think it's important to say that I am by no means an expert on this, and Mary and I at Raising Futures are very much kind of on, I would say, sort of close to the beginning of our journey on this work. This is something that I have really tried to learn more about in the last few years. And I'm still learning a lot, even in pulling together this training. I had my mind opened to different ways of thinking. So the manifesto focuses on these key principles. Embrace a vision of a good society. Cast off the restrictive framework of international development, which is often defined by money and power. Moving away from quick solutions, change how we approach success, creatively find ways of unlocking the inherent power of the communities that we work with. Move away from a capacity building viewpoint to community organization and movement building. This is one that really challenged my perspective, because capacity building is a phrase that I probably use about 10 times a day. And so reading this and kind of improving and increasing my knowledge on these new suggested ways of working and ways of talking about the work that we're doing This one in particular has been a learning curve for me. Ensuring that external funding recognises, respects and builds on local resources. Expanding horizons beyond money as the central driver for change. Changing the language that we use and the dominance of English as the main language. And finally, changing ourselves with humility and boldness. Through this work, we do have to, as individuals, challenge some of our viewpoints, and we might have to have uncomfortable conversations with ourselves where we hold the mirror up and say, you know, I have been guilty of doing that. And I think it's really important that we can do that without feeling too guilty about it. You know, we are learning and we are trying to do better. And I think that that's part of the process of holding up that mirror. So you can see underneath the main title there, the gist of this manifesto is essentially looking towards a future that's negotiated, it's participatory, and it's widely owned. It's not a future that is dictated or determined by a powerful and small few that are far removed from the communities and the individuals that we're looking to support. And it's a movement of generosity over the success of a single organization. One thing that I think small organizations are incredible at doing, and small international development charities in particular, from my experience, is sharing resources, sharing guidance, sharing advice. And there's definitely a feeling of us all needing to work together for the greater good and not the success of a single organization. So some questions to ask yourself about power dynamics. Who determines the strategic direction of your charity's work? Who's in the room when you're sitting with your board of trustees or whoever makes the decisions about what you're going to be doing next, the strategic direction of the charity? Who designs the projects? Who goes into the project detail and decides exactly what's going to happen? Who makes important decisions? So once programs and projects are underway, if there's a problem that needs a resolution, who's making that call? Who gets asked, how should we respond to this problem? Who's in control of the money? How often is money transferred to partner organizations? If there's an emergency spend needed, does your partner organization need to come to you to ask for that? Or are they given freedom to have money to spend at their own discretion according to how they feel that should be spent? These are just some initial questions to start thinking about, just to consider the power dynamics at play in your own organization. There's some really good quotes that I think help to put some of this in context from leaders of NGOs and CBOs, community-based organizations operating at local level. So this is Amitabh Behar, the CEO of Oxfam India, who says, "I just don't understand why INGOs need hundreds of people sitting in the north with huge teams to support southern NGOs on the ground. Most of the resources get tied to these headquarters and little goes to the south. Real decision-making about what needs to be done and how is still decided by headquarter-based northern experts." Similarly, Irungu Horton, he's the chief executive of Amnesty International in Kenya, with a very interesting thought. "In their current form, we simply don't need INGOs, that's us, unless they are going to shift the power. How do international civic organizations empower and support the local is the main question that needs to be asked." And it's a hard pill to swallow, because we all dedicate our lives to this work. But I think it's a really important question to be asked. Let's consider the resource that we invest in our own organizations, in the global north, in the UK in our case, and just start to ask ourselves the question of what could happen if that resource was invested locally. So really shifting the power is also about shifting the narrative. So it's the way that we talk about our work as well. And this is something that I personally feel like I can't keep up with. I'm constantly trying to improve my understanding of this context. I'm trying to make sure that I'm using the most appropriate and up-to-date language, but I find it quite overwhelming as well. And it's something that is ever changing. But it's something that I'm trying to learn and do better with. So some key points on shifting the narrative is to limit colonial era terminology from development vocabulary. So providing alternatives to problematic phrases. So phrases that we use every day, phrases that I still find coming out in my vocabulary because I don't feel like I necessarily have an alternative yet. Phrases such as aid, beneficiaries, developed or developing country. One recommendation is to move towards a framing of our work as global solidarity, not international development. Global solidarity suggests something that we're doing together as a team in an equitable way. International development implies it's something that an international community is doing to a group of people, perhaps. It's a tricky one to start to use because people understand international development very clearly as a sector of work. You can go to university and study international development as an academic subject. If I was to say, I'm doing a training course for people working in global solidarity, people may not come because they don't necessarily recognize that phrase. But it's about having those conversations and just starting to have those conversations about, maybe we need a different way of talking about this work. Who gets the credit for the impact of the work? Do Global North organizations get the credit for the work of our partners who are actually implementing the programs? How do we talk about the work of our organization on our website and on social media? Does our message and narrative contribute to the problem or shift the narrative? Are we using language on our website that is degrading perhaps to the people that we support? Knowingly or unknowingly, we know that poverty porn is something that has been used in the development sector to elicit donations. We hopefully are starting to move away from that now. But can we move even further to ensure that the narrative is contributing to this shift the power movement rather than contributing to the problem of framing our work as something that we are doing to communities or individuals? What are we all doing as organizations to actively shift the power? So there's some context for where we are with Shift the Power at the minute. I'm just seeing if there's any comments come through the chat. I'd be interested just to hear some initial reactions before we move on to hear from my colleague Mary. Do you want to all just put a couple of words or a couple of sentences in the chat just to say your initial thoughts after hearing that? Are you surprised, intrigued, confused, excited? After hearing a little bit about what the Shift the Power movement is all about, how are you feeling? Deborah's glad to see it. Good. Yeah, I have to say it is, as I said, it really is a rabbit hole of information, and it's exciting and overwhelming in equal measure. Yeah, thanks, Georgie. I think the credit for the work thing is something that definitely made me think a little differently about how we present our organization's work on social media and on the website. Neil's making a good point there about the responsibility resting with the individual and not the coach. Yep, so definitely something to be said about giving the opportunity for the power to be taken as well. And Neil saying, let's move forward together, yeah. So every UK charity has a defined object and is legally bound to keep that. Few such objects will say, and send money to partner to spend as and when they wish. How to overcome this obvious barrier to genuine partnership with respect. Yeah, interesting point. I think quite often charitable objects for UK organisations working overseas will usually refer to the work that's being implemented in the country. So, for example, our organisation, Raising Futures Kenya, delivers vocational training to young people, and our charitable objects talk about the reduction of poverty for young people in Kenya. And so in our governing document, it doesn't stipulate whether we do that by making all of the decisions and holding the money, or whether we support a partner organisation to be able to do that. And I think there's definitely space for genuine partnership with respect. I think that because I've been thinking about this for a few years now, my thinking has become quite radical in that I'm sort of the opinion that, well, you'll hear in a moment from Mary at our organisation, that in our next 5-year strategic plan, we're moving towards a total shifting of the power and the funding to our partner organisation. And so as of 2026, the question will be posed, what remains of Raising Futures Kenya in the UK? And that's a question that we will be starting to think about seriously in the next few years. Sharon said we've been discussing this for a couple of years, taking some initial steps. Yeah, that's where we are now as well. So thanks, everyone. So that leads us on nicely then to hear from my colleague, Mary. We have been aware, I've been working at Raising Futures for about 4 years. We've been aware of the Shift the Power kind of movement, I'd say more informally. It kind of came from us feeling like that's something that we should be doing anyway. And then in the last few years, I've become more aware of the formal movement around Shift the Power. And so Mary's going to introduce herself in a sec, and she's going to talk a bit from her perspective about how that process has been for us so far. Over to you, Mary. Thank you.
Thank you, Vic. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to see all of you in the webinar and hear the steps that you are taking and making to make sure that you are also in the debate of Shift the Power. I have been working with Raising Futures Kenya for 13 years this year, since 2009, September. I joined in as a junior accounting clerk and rose on to become a partnerships officer, to a child protection officer, to currently being the director of operations. So I would say that I've literally grown with the organization to when we're just like a few of us, to when the whole programs came under me, and it's been an exciting journey. I would say, I was talking to Vic this morning and I was telling her I've been there in the 2 phases of the organization, when the majority of our strategy and decisions were driven from the UK side, as we work very closely with the UK organization, to now where practically, we lead in much of the decision making and the program designs and feed into the UK organization. So as Vic has said earlier, our work mainly involves working with young people, but we've also historically worked with children, and that's why I said child protection. So the very first discussion I think we had as an open discussion with Vic, which as she said was a very informal bit of shifting the power, was in 2018. And we were both new at heading the organization. So I'd just come in as the programs manager when my predecessor left, and Vic had just come in to head the UK organization, which previously was under trustees. So when we had the first conversation, I would say for me, the reaction was mixed feelings. One, it was excitement. To kind of get an open picture of what is happening in the UK side and how we could relate with that in the Kenyan side. Excited that from where I sat in Nairobi, I could know where our finances was, because we were 100% reliant on the UK organization for funding. But at the same time, I was also scared a bit, because here I was very new heading the organization, and I'm starting to kind of see the big picture. And my colleague on the UK side is saying we have to work this together. And this is not something that I had done previously. I was used to kind of know this is what we are working on. This is what we expect. So a much more implementation kind of model. To now we came to the execution model as a team. So that was a mixed reaction for me and for my team as well, because it wasn't something that we were used to. The reason also why it was mixed, because it also came at a time of transition. So we were just having like staff in the UK side from trustees, and Vic was there. She was very new to us. And on the other side, in the Kenyan side, I was also just taking on the mantle of leadership from the former director. So both of us were very new, yet we knew this is the direction we want to steer the organization to. But we needed to kind of look through it and see whether it was a feasible idea. So my concerns and why the mixed feelings were like, was the change going to be permanent, or and especially because of that transition, there was that uncertainty, whether it would be permanent, whether it was something that would try and then it flops. But I'm happy to say today that we've successfully achieved much of what we were looking at that point. The other concern I had was, of course, whether our capacity allowed us to do that, because initially we were very much on the program implementation and not leading the change. So I would say that that was also a concern that I had, and especially because the whole team was also looking up at me to lead them. The other concern I had was securing funding. Unfortunately, here in Kenya, we do not have as much a wide ground to go hunt for funding as you have on your end. So that was also something that I was shaky about, whether it would be something that would achieve. We are still walking that journey with my colleagues, and gradually we are getting there. And as Vic said, we're hoping that by 2026, we should be able to fund our budgets to some percentage locally. Of course, there was the self-doubt. I think you've already picked it up from all those concerns I said. Here was myself, very new to the position, and leading a team of about 23 people who were all looking up at me. Yeah, so I was like, am I going to do this? Is it going to be successful? But we did work as a team, and we made it through. So some of the some of the solutions that enabled us to overcome those challenges. One was that we did it as a team. So when I had that conversation with Vic on where we were in the UK organization and where we were in the Kenyan organization as a totally dependent organization in the UK organization, I also had a sitting with my team here and explained to them, this is where we are. This is the new director in the UK. She's been very honest and open with us to let us know what is happening. So we have to work as a team to make sure that one, the programs work is working here. So if they're going to do the fundraising, we have to feed all the information, but we also have to make the programs work so that the funders will see it. But we also started intentionally looking for funding in the country. The other thing is that the UK team has been supportive with the whole process. Again, it's not something that you'll say we are shifting the power today and tomorrow you expect your partners to run with it. It's taken us 3 years so far, and I would say we are like a third way there. We still have 2 that to move. So the two wonderful ladies, Vic and Kirsty, intentionally have been able to steer us forward and support us within the process by stepping aside and allowing us to read the process. We have made mistakes along the way, but again, as a team, we've been able to collect them, learn from them, and make sure that the next project is successful. We also intentionally started creating systems that would hold everybody accountable. So that was the team, some of the board members. So where we just worked previously with, this is what you need to implement, you go on the ground and implement. We now started a very intentional program where every individual had to account for what they had done. And that was checked through one-to-one meetings, staff meetings, team meetings held with all the team on an annual basis, looking through the strategy as a team. So we created systems that would ensure that the ownership of the project was from the highest person to the person manning our gates at the training centers, so that everybody felt that they were part and parcel of the entire organization. The other thing that we did was that we also added capacity building budget to our annual budget from 2018. And from that point, we started having our teams from all over the 3 counties that we work in Kenya meet once per year for 2 to 3 days, hosted in a hotel or getaway place, where we would all come up, review the year, review the challenges, review the successes, plan for the coming year. And with that, the team's morale was boosted, but also the ownership for both the team and the community, because our team members majorly come from the communities where our training centers are. It also went up. The other bit on overcoming my own self-doubt, I had to dig in and do lots of research, especially on different topics, consulting my peers and my colleagues, asking for help from the Board of Trustees in our Kenyan organization. So just making sure that when we are going to implement a project, we've managed to get all the information. When I'm faced with something that I have to make a major decision on, I have all the details that I need to. And again, the team, both here in the UK, have been a big resource in making sure that that is happening always. So our case study today is the separate strategic planning process. So this year, for the first time ever, the Kenyan NGO, we are registered here as an NGO, is going to have a separate strategic plan and a theory of change from the UK organization. So previously we have had a joint theory of change and a joint strategic plan with each of the organizations slotted the areas that they are leading. But from this year, we are actually in the process of drafting the first strategic plan for the Kenyan NGO, a combined effort from the top staff in the Kenyan NGO and the Kenyan Board of Management. So this for us is a major step forward. I had a sitting with my board members when we drafted the theory of change, and they were actually very excited that we are doing this as an organization, because they were like, we've not had a guiding document to tell us this is where we are going. We've been kind of mixed up with how we support the organization, because we've not been doing this as a separate organization. So there has been that clash of power, and the clash of power also coming up with some confusion with the Kenyan board. So this for us is a big opportunity. It has enabled some of the board members who are not very active to come up and start chipping in. This is how we want to do it. They are concerned on how the strategic plan is going. We are aiming to have the strategic plan ready by the end of June this year, so that by July, when we have our AGM, we start now on the implementation with the board. At the same time, the strategic planning process has motivated the staff, as I said earlier. In our meeting with our end of year meeting with the staff in 2021, this was one of the things that we covered. And right from the security personnel to the training staff in our Seed of Hope centers to the management staff, there was that ownership, there was that excitement of wanting to see where are we. There was also the understanding that we are working on this one, and the UK organization is aside working on a different strategy. So for that one, and it being a first time thing, again, for the entire staff, they are like excited, let's do this, we can do this. So it has really motivated and inspired our staff. Challenges along the strategic planning, again, self-doubt coming again, because this is the first time we are doing it, but I'll say that halfway through the process now, as we aim to finish it in June, I think we've already been able to overcome that one. The other thing has been the engagement of the board of management. So a bit of a disadvantage here is that our boards of management are not very active, but through giving them like a draft theory of change for them to discuss, they've been able to re-engage, which has been a positive thing for myself and for my team. So some of them who have not been doing much have been able now to come. They do like send a message, where are we with the process? Have you gotten this? Have you gotten the other one? They're giving proposals. So it's been a positive, and we've been able to overcome that one.
Mary, would you mention about the French embassy? Because I think that's really interesting, you know, about what we were talking about, how they don't want to fund local NGOs controlled by Europe. Could you mention that?
Yes, I was going to come back probably and mention it earlier, like the practical cases we've seen. So last year we had a funding application to the French embassy for one of our projects. And when our application went through, unknown to us what the pre-funding interview was, it was all about to screen who are your funders, what are you going to do with this money? So a lot of like wanting to know the organization more. So because we had stated our partnership with the UK organization, the program officer was categorical that we do not fund organizations that are led from Europe. So we had to go down and say we have an MOU with the UK organization on how we operate. We have an autonomous organization here. Our accounts are fully audited and filed with the NGO board in Kenya. So it's something that is coming up. Again, when we had that discussion on the strategic planning with the board, I remember one of our board members, the vice chair of the board, who is also working with the International Development organizations, she clearly said that we have a lot of funding opportunities, but we are quite limited because of the fact that our organization is registered in the UK. So this is also a good opportunity to kind of make, as we get the theory of change and the strategic planning, to have the MOU updated to show that the operations and the decision making and all that is read in Kenya to a large extent, because that way we'll be able to get more funding locally. So that is also something that we are pondering on doing. We're still not yet clear on how we got about it, but it's something that we are looking at. How more do we make the local organization more autonomous to make sure that we are accessing much of the funding. Yeah. Yes.
Thanks, Mary.
Oh, we're here already.
Did you want me to go back to the previous slide, or are you ready for this one?
No, it's okay, Vic. I think we can always come back if there's any questions to respond to them. So I think for me, for the 3 years that we've been in this conversation, which has largely been informal, maybe until last year, where we started talking about Shift the Power more clearly. One of the things that I appreciate with my colleagues in the UK side has been being honest and clear. So we've been able to do the project planning, and they are very honest that we can do this and not this one. So this is one of the things that maybe I would recommend. The other point of contention has, of course, always been the funding. So being upfront about the available finances or the potentially available and can be channeled here for expenditure has also been very helpful. It has, to a large extent, enabled us to avoid disappointment, but also to avoid over-expectation, especially from our projects, because we do very much consult the teachers, the community through needs assessments. So when we're going to do those needs assessments and feedback to the fundraising team in the UK, we still go back and tell them this is what we are working with, and we cannot go beyond here, because unless we get extra funding, this is what we have. The other thing that we've been able to do with the UK organization is do our annual budgeting together, so that each organization knows that this is what we are looking at. And when we are both fundraising, we pool the resources to the same budget, so that we know if we have an excess or a deficit, then this is what we are working on. Then the other item is interpersonal support and taking it slow. As we said earlier, it's a process that takes time, again, dependent on where you are with your partner, where you're starting from and where you want to go. Massive support needed in between point A to point B, where you want the ideal point to be. Then giving space for project staff to lead. So like I said earlier, stepping back and equipping the partner staff to be able to develop, whether it's the project plans, going on the ground to conduct community needs assessment, and coming back to feed on you that this is what the communities need. I think earlier on we said organization and community led. So allowing their ideas to come to shape the program design, so that it's more about them than the triangle that we had, the hierarchical triangle that we had, so that we are able to flip it. So we've been able to do that, I would say, to a big extent, more than 70%. We've been able to lead from even ourselves, from where I sit. We start from the community where we are implementing the project, to the staff in the project, to us, the management, to enable us to design the program, to Kirsty and Vic for fundraising, or to us for the funding application, and then again back to the community again to feedback on whether we are able to fund the program or not. So I'd say that that is one of the areas where we've been able to work very well with the UK organization. And above all, building trust. So trusting us that whatever is being sent to us. I know one of the participants said in the comments box that it's not always easy, especially where we do not have controls, but to some extent you have to have that trust, and especially where finances are involved. So trusting that when money is sent from the UK, we'll go down and implement the project as they were supposed to be implemented. We'll come back and feed back to the UK organization and to the funders as we were supposed to feed back. Trusting that there will not be any fraudulent cases of the funding. There is no fraudulent cases of reporting work that was not done. So again, this is something that we've been able to achieve within the two organizations, and this has really enabled us to move in the right direction. So I would say that those are the main areas that I would say. It's a give and take. So you just grow with your partner, you allow them to make mistakes, you show them that the trust is there, because definitely at the end of the day, I would say for us as an organization, the growth that we've experienced the last 3 years is massive compared to where we've come from, maybe since I joined the organization more than a decade ago. So these very open conversations with the staff in the UK and the staff here have enabled all of us to move as one team, to have a very high level of trust of each other, that I'm not shaky if my colleague is talking to Vic or to Kirsty and telling them that I'm going to County A to implement this project, or when, for example, if I got sick and I had to take a sick off of a whole month, I know that things still running because there is no shady business happening anywhere. So it's taken us a lot of trust building from both the UK team and the team here to ensure that we are operating in a very open space for all of us. So I will stop it at that point unless there are questions which I can respond to.
Thanks, Mary. I'm so proud listening to you talk about all of that. I've got the warm and fuzzy feelings, so that was just a real joy to listen to. Thank you. We will just pause for a minute to see whether there are any questions in the chat, because we're going to move on in a minute to having a little breakout groups for us to reflect on what we've heard and talk for a while in smaller groups. But while Mary's comments and contributions are sort of fresh in your mind, does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask Mary? We do have some time at the end for Q&A as well. But while we are at this natural pause, if you, Sharon, feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm not going to turn my video on just because I'm sort of dying on the sofa here a little bit.
Oh, no.
Sorry for my voice, it's a little bit croaky.
Oh, thank you for doing this whilst dying on the sofa. That's very committed of you.
Mary and Vic, thank you very much. It was such a great presentation. Mary, I have a question for you, which is, I just wonder, how did your team in Kenya respond initially to this whole process? We have embarked on a similar journey, and we found it, fascinating how different members of the team reacted to becoming Ugandan-led, and what that meant to particularly to different generations of our team. The older generation had very, very different viewpoints to the younger generation, and I wonder whether you faced anything similar in Kenya.
Well, I'm smiling because we faced a mixture of reactions. Vic can tell you that some of our team used to email the lady who was the director before me and complain to her, and she would send the same emails back to us. So it was a dramatic change, to say the least. Well, coming in with the transition wasn't helpful at all, because as Vic was settling in, at some point our funding from the UK, because it came on a monthly basis, delayed. So everybody was shaken, panicky, and they were like, so the organization is closing down. And I think some of them who were very bold came up to my face, and the others were just like talking in low tones. But it was one for, I would say, for like the younger generation, the excitement was there. But for the people who had been with the organization for a very long time, and they were not prepared to this kind of a change, because at the point of transition, we were literally like transitioning from a family-led organization to a stranger-led organization, if I can term it that way, with Vic's permission. So you are transitioning traditionally from an organization led from the founders to a member of the family to now being totally led by strangers. It was a very hard transition for the staff because they had also identified themselves with the family of the founders and the previous leader. So some of them, they were quite excited, especially the younger generation. So the younger generation who had not been there for more than 2-3 years were very excited to see what this change brings. But the older staff who had been with the organization 10 years, more than 10 years, were very resistant because, of course, there was the fear of what happens. Now we have a new leader on this end and another new leader on that, on the other end. So we still got a lot of people emailing our former director, some of the members of the trustee board in the UK to tell them this was working like this, it's now working like this, should we continue or should we not? But I would say that with consistent communication of how things were changing, of what we were expecting, we were able to iron that out. Maybe I would say within about 6 months. It really took us a long time for everybody to adjust to the new way of things.
Thanks, Mary. Caroline.
Hiya, thanks. I've got a few questions, so if you're going to answer them later, feel free to delay them. But just on I'm thinking sort of about the transferal of management of finances over to, in our case, Ethiopia would be. I could see as a first step that we could do like whole project budgets and give over the whole project budget and let them manage it once it's raised. I'm curious about how you managed transferring core costs and how you transitioned that over. And I guess one of my concerns is that our own internal systems aren't actually good enough to sit down in the way that you're saying, planning the budget together. I'm not sure that with the way that even that we operate in the UK, obviously we have our budget and we know what's happening, but that we could sit down and clearly say, we can give you this for the next however many years for them to decide what they're doing. And then just related to that, you mentioned before about, having a capacity building budget, which is obviously really important to not just sort of hand it over to them and say, you by yourselves now. But where did that come from? And did you start sort of downscaling stuff in the UK first to create that budget? Or did you overlap a bit?
Mary, do you mind if I respond first and then pass to you?
Please go on, Vic. I was actually going to ask what the first, I think I missed the very first bit of the question. So if you can rephrase it for myself as well.
Yeah, so the first question was about kind of shifting the ownership of money and giving more money management responsibility to you guys in Kenya. So this is definitely something that we are still working on. We are still at the point of generally having monthly transfers, partly kind of for our own like cash flow and management at this side, because we obviously get money monthly. We don't get the full project funding necessarily up front, but it's definitely something that we want to work towards shifting more of. I'd say some of the steps that we have taken are things like previously there would be like the amount of money that was sent would be the exact amount of money that we knew needed to be spent the following month. And so we now have split our reserves so that the Kenyan organization holds its own reserves. We don't hold them in the UK. So that if there's an emergency situation that requires dipping into the reserves, there's no coming to us to ask. There's no waiting for us to transfer them if that's necessary. We also, I'm kind of laughing internally here because my colleague Kirsty, who's listening to this, is by far the money person in our organization. I'm completely financially illiterate and I hate money and numbers. So Kirsty's probably listening thinking, that is not what happens. So feel free to jump in, Kirsty, in the chat, or unmute yourself if you want. But one of the things we also decided to do was to have kind of an emergency fund available in the Kenyan bank account that could be used at the discretion of Mary in the team. And perhaps Mary could talk a bit more about that in particular. The budgeting has been a labor of love between Kirsty and Mary, working closely on that. And as you heard, Mary is a former accountant. So thankfully for us, she's very financially literate. So it was definitely still a work in progress for us. But some of those small steps that we've taken, I think, have helped just to experiment a bit with more financial ownership on the Kenyan side. Mary, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, I think what you've said is correct, but the other thing that we've also taken formally starting this year is that we are doing a lump sum transfer now from the UK, so that we do have the common budget, and I think this is the guiding tool. So we know that in this month, this was what was budgeted for, but we are doing transfers far and above that amount. So we have like a monthly amount that we transfer, and then we'll account for the expenditure and transfer the difference the following month. So that has been helpful because we have the emergency situations that need funding that we are now able to fund. But all of them, they are really guided by the budgeting process. So that is the core tool that we've been using. Also, as you said, we have the reserves here. So the reserves, we've been able to make investment decisions like to put the reserves in a money market fund, which is generating us some good amount of income on a monthly basis. So we're able to plow back now this funding to some of the costs that were in our budget on an annual basis. The other thing is that I said funds raised from both here and the UK are put into the same pool. So if we get funding from this end and our budget was being funded from the UK, we are able to either take that amount to the investment basket and get some more income as the UK side, where we already had that item budgeted for, continues to do the transfers, or we can bring down the transfers amount from the UK and spend the funding that we've been able to generate from here. So we've been operating in a very open system, as I said earlier, where the team in the UK knows that this is what we have. We have a common accounting tool where we'll say these are the bank balances at the end of the month. So Kirsty seated in the UK knows Mary has this amount. We need to, this amount is assigned to this project. So the flows she has is this. For that reason, we're able to.
You just cut out at the end, Mary. Could you repeat that last sentence? Can you still hear us? Do you want to turn your video off, Mary? I think the internet's just having a wobble.
My internet connection is me. I can see from my screen my internet.
Just, do you want to turn your video off, Mary, and see if that helps? While we're waiting for Mary's video or internet connection to stabilize as well, I'll just come back on your other point, Caroline, about the capacity building fund. So we're really lucky to have quite, for a small charity, quite a large group of individual donors. So we have a decent amount of unrestricted income, and partly we decided to allocate that So we really increased the amount of income that we were getting through trusts and foundations for project costs, and that freed up some of our unrestricted funds to be able to spend on things like capacity building, staff away days, training for staff. So that capacity building fund is not only for kind of the away days and it's for formal training, it's also for things like better pastoral packages for the staff as well. And some of our staff are involved in quite emotionally challenging work, and so we offer counselling to staff as well, and all of that kind of comes from that unrestricted. We do recover some of those costs from trusts and foundations applications as well. So we make sure that we recover all of our costs in trusts and foundations applications by including lines for things like staff training, monitoring and evaluation, staff capacity building. So we package all of that up in our trusts and foundations applications as well. And so it's funded by a combination of our unrestricted funds and then funds that are specific to the projects. And we make sure that cuts through all of the applications. Mary, are you here and can you?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay. Perfect. Caroline, was that all right? Did you want any other clarifications?
Oh yeah, that's great. I think I could come up with about 15 questions, but that's
okay
for now. Thank you.
We'll find a way to answer them at some point. There are a couple of other questions in the chat, Mary. I'm just going to read them out. So John's asked, Mary, could you please give, if possible, without breaching confidentiality, one concrete example of the activities for which people in Kenya are now spending on and how that played out, re the shifting the power agenda? So John, just so that I'm clear, so are you wanting an example of a specific project that is now totally designed and managed and responsible, the Kenya team are responsible for? Is that what you were asking? Sorry, just unmute yourself, John. Sorry, we can't hear you, John. Just unmute your mic. There we go.
Sorry. Yes, either something that's been wholly, as it were, passed on to Ghana, where all the money is there for a specific purpose, or maybe shared. It doesn't matter which. It's just having a picture of the sort of things that you do out there. Whereas so far, all the talk has been abstract and accounting, but I'm just trying to get a picture of what really happens with your charity. That's all.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, Mary, can you think of one?
Yeah, I think I'll take up the whole program of Seed of Hope as it is at the moment. So in 2020, after the COVID effects, we did a community needs assessment in November 2020 because there were devastating effects of the first period of COVID-19 with lockdowns and businesses going down and students being out of school and all that. So when we resumed learning in 2020 October, we did a community needs assessment in November, one to find out the courses that the communities where our Seed of Hope centers. So Seed of Hope centers are training centers, vocational training centers, where young people train for free, and that is majorly the work that we do. They are based in 3 areas. 2 are in the rural areas in a county called Murang'a and another one called Kitui, and one is in Nairobi in a slum area called Dagoretti. So after the effects of COVID, and of course because we are doing a lot of response, we did a community needs assessment, and from the community needs assessment, one of the things that we learned from the young people and the community in general was that our courses were taking too long, so that the students were not able to find employment or get the skills they needed to start small businesses fast enough. And now with the deteriorating economy after COVID-19, we needed to change that. So in 2021, we embarked on a curriculum review So the training, we use a curriculum accredited by the government agencies. So for us, we use what we call National Industrial Training Authority and the Technical Vocational Training Education Authority. So we embarked on a curriculum review with the two authorities from January to March 2021. One of the objectives of the curriculum review was to shorten the duration of courses from 12 months to 6 months and from 2 years to 1 year for some of the courses, so that we could be able to respond to the needs of the community from the needs assessment. So by May 2021, we had successfully been able to review the curriculum to a shorter duration. And from that, we were also able to now increase the number of young people that we enroll in the training centers because the shortened duration of curriculum implementation meant that we could train twice the number that we usually trained in a year, because now the durations were shortened, but then the curriculum compression had been done in such a professional way that the NITA, the government's National Industrial Training Authority, were very satisfied with our curriculum, even better than a similar curriculum that was being implemented by the government for young people. So that is just one practical case. I don't know whether.
No, that's a great example. Thank you very much, Mary.
Yeah. So the design, the community needs assessment led us to the program design. We did mutual budgeting with CASTE in the UK, and then we came back to the community. We did the feedback for the CNA and how we were going to respond to it, and they were appreciative. And now we started the implementation of that in July 2021, and we are very proud to say that it's been very successful.
Thank you, Mary. So there's a couple of other questions in the chat, and then we've got a short breakout exercise after this. I'm conscious not to cut off our time for Q&A, but I don't want to take us over time. So there's 2 more questions in the chat that if we could just quickly respond to, then we'll go for a quick breakout session, and then we'll come back to end. So Neil has asked Mary whether you report financially to your local board and to the UK board each month, or how frequently do you do your financial reporting to both of the sides? Could you comment on that?
Yeah, we do report on a monthly basis to our local board, because they have to approve the expenditure for every end of the month. Not the full board per se, but the treasurer of the board, who is then obligated to go and report to the board if he has any concerns or stop the authorization. To the UK board, I do not report directly to the UK board, but on a monthly basis, we have the mutual conversations of what we are spending on with my UK counterpart. So I would say I do not have the responsibility to report to the UK board. So maybe Vic or Caste in the chats can explain how they go about that on their end.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, so Mary liaises with my colleague Kirsty, who is responsible for financial management in the UK side, and Kirsty provides a digest for the treasurer and the chair monthly, I believe, and then a full financial report for each trustees meeting. So Mary doesn't need to report directly to the trustees. We do that on her behalf. And the final question from Neil was, did you receive any concerns from donors about how you ensure that funds are used for the purpose intended? Control of finances from the UK is currently strong reassurance to donors. Yeah, so this is a huge problem in the sector, as we saw on that very first slide of funders being at the top of the pyramid, needing an INGO intermediary, supposedly because we're so much more trustworthy than our southern counterparts. And so we haven't had any, I mean, firstly, we've been doing this very much internally. So the Shift the Power work has been something that we've been doing internally. In our next strategic plan period for the next 5 years, it's something that we're going to be doing much more externally. We're going to be advocating for this in the sector. We're going to be speaking to funders about cutting us out as an intermediary and giving the funding directly to our Kenyan NGO. So I think the answer to that question is sort of report back in a year's time and see what they say. We've not had any, I mean, we definitely do come across funders who say that they want to give via a UK organisation. Sometimes it's for tax and sometimes it's for that trust element. A big part of our work over the next 5 years is going to be pushing back hard on that assumption and that kind of just traditional way of working that is kind of traditional but not necessarily true or helpful. So we're really going to be working with funders, and one of our strategic goals is to work with some of our existing funders who we know trust us and we know have seen the amazing work, to say to them, you don't need to give us the money, give the money straight to our Kenyan NGO and see them do the great work, and you know, you don't need us as your intermediary. So it's definitely a really important part of this conversation. And the Shift the Power movement has a whole branch that talks about localizing philanthropy and cutting out INGOs as the middle ground. So we are going to be talking about our progress on this at Raising Futures. We'll be putting it on our website, we'll be emailing people on our newsletter, and we're going to be sharing our highs and lows along the way. So maybe I'll need to come back to you on that, Neil, when I've had some conversations with these funders. Okay, we've got just about 10 minutes left. I'm just going to bring us back to the presentation briefly. So to set us up for this breakout room in a second, I just want to bring us back to considering what the future of INGOs is. So there's the old way and there's this new way. There's an exercise being undertaken by Bond recently that looked at the future of the British INGO sector. And this was more towards the bigger INGOs, but it's still relevant for us, I think. And they spoke to lots of different people in the sector. They spoke to local NGOs and community-based organisations, and they talked to some of the big players in the UK development industry. And they considered that 10 years down the line from now, we'll likely see far less programmatic delivery and much more advocacy and solidarity work emerging from northern INGOs like us, which will mean in practical terms, smaller teams in the north who are more focused on connecting and mobilizing and enabling rather than doing. And there's been an exponential growth kind of in the 90s and 2000s of organizations like ours, and that we're likely going to see a decrease in the number of organizations establishing in this work, and hopefully a decrease in the number of organizations who are in a position of leading the work. So with that in mind, I'm just going to put us into some breakout rooms for us just to reflect in some smaller groups about what we've heard, and maybe to talk a little bit about ways that you have started to shift the power in your organizations, or ways that you're thinking, I think we could do this, now that we've heard a little bit from Mary about some ideas. I was hoping we'd have a bit longer for this, but I was enjoying that Q&A. So we'll have 5 minutes in our breakout rooms, and then we'll come back just to allow me to signpost you to some further resources and to have some final thoughts. Before we go into the breakout room, I'm going to just quickly do a poll, if you wouldn't mind, to give us an idea of whether any of you would like to be connected through the peer support match through the FSI. It should have just popped up on your screen. If you could just take a moment to vote, and then we'll go out into our breakout rooms. And when we're in these breakout rooms, these won't be recorded or available for people to view on demand. So you can talk freely, it's a safe space. You don't need to worry about it being seen by hundreds of people. Okay, so I've got 7 people voted. If you want to let us know whether you're interested in a peer support match, just take a minute to do that now, and I'm going to end it in a few seconds. Okay, thank you for doing that. I'm going to end the poll now. And I'm going to put us in our breakout rooms. So let me do this. So you'll join the room and we'll come back in a few minutes. Let's give it 4 minutes and then we'll come back for 1 minute of wrapping up at the end. Okay, now I just need to work out how to get everyone else back. There we go. Hopefully everybody else will start coming back now. Have any of you got a meeting straight after this? Okay, feel free to duck out because I'm just going to finish with some slides like with links, which you'll get in your handout anyway.
Okay.
So if you need to go, feel free to, but thanks for coming, Neil.
I will nip off. Thank you. That was really informative.
Okay,
Yeah.
Speak soon. Okay, so I think everyone should be coming back in a sec. 14 seconds until they're kicked out. Just get my screen back up. Okay, welcome back everyone. Sorry that I'm taking us slightly over time. If you've got a meeting that you need to get straight onto, please feel free to duck out, and all of these slides will be available in the online area in your FSI portal. I'm just going to finish with, well, firstly, I hope you had some interesting conversations in the breakout rooms. I was planning to have a bit longer for those. Sorry if you got cut off at the end there. There is a whole slide here about where you can find more information about the Shift the Power movement. So on the left is just a small collection of some of the links where you can go for some further reading. There are so many players in this movement now. You can be going for days reading about all of the amazing work in the Shift the Power arena. There are some great tools as well, like the Bond Power Awareness tool, I think is a really good free tool that you can put your organization through just to get a bit of an external lens on where the power sits in your organization. You can also get support from your peers, either through a peer support match from the FSI. I also manage a Facebook group for people like us who work or volunteer or are trustees in small international development charities. And all of those are linked and you'll be able to get those through the PDF that'll be available in your learner portal. So I'll just leave us with this quote then from an open letter from 130 local CSOs to the international NGO sector that was published last year. If you're serious about shifting the power, then reduce your footprint and brand and use your fundraising machinery to help grassroots organizations create the structures to fundraise for themselves and sustain their work. So the time is for us to step aside and shine a light on our fantastic partners and the individuals in our communities. So I really hope that this has been a useful introduction to you all for Shift the Power, with starting to get our head around this global movement. I am happy to stick around for a couple of minutes if anybody's not in a rush and has any more questions. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming today. Appreciate your time and thoughtful questions and comments, and hopefully look forward to seeing you again at another FSI event in the near future. Thank you so much to Mary as well for coming and offering her insight on this. So thank you very much, Mary.
Thank you, Vic.
No worries. I'll just stick around for a couple of minutes. If anyone's got questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask them as we wait for to see whether anyone needs to drop off.